I realized some of the flowers we have in our garden, they come in two different forms. They have male flowers and female flowers. Some flowers have both the male and female parts of the same flower itself. These are all different methods that plants employ so that they can ensure they don't pollinate themselves. Yeah? This is a very classic example of a plant that really does not want its own pollen grains to land on itself. So what you find is that it has female flowers on a separate plant of its own, but same species. So our question here is, I think a skill to pick up is, can you tell if it's an insect or wind pollinated flower? And in real life, it's actually much harder to tell than you think. Here, yesterday, a lot of us brought up the idea that this could be wind pollinated. And here are some of our friends' points. So Zoe says that it's wind pollinated because she observes that the flowers are down colored, anthers are hanging out so that the pollen can be easily blown by the wind. Okay? If you look at your table in the textbook, they do use another word which you could use as well. It says something along the lines of pendulous. So over here, stamens may not be pendulous, or the stamens is pendulous. The word pendulous comes from the word pendulum. So imagine now, rather than a pendulum, you replace it with anthers. Yeah, so that's what they mean. Anthers can be pendulous in nature, swinging in the wind. Let's look at Kylie's point. She says wind pollinated as it has long slender filaments and it is down colored. Okay? I like the point brought up about the color. Also, she tried to describe the filaments. Okay, then a question comes to mind. Actually, yesterday when you were looking, or was it yesterday? Yeah, it's yesterday when you're looking at a blue pea flower, when you look at the filaments of the blue pea flower, remember there were 10 of these in total. Actually, if you look at the filament, it's also very slender, right? So is slender a defining trait of a flower that is insect pollinated or wind pollinated? It's hard to say because when you look at the blue pea flower, it's also slender and long. But when you look at this particular flower, also slender and long. So what is the key? I think the key is, if you want to be pollinated by wind, whatever the case, if you have long filament, you better not be wrapped up with petals, right? Because if it's wrapped up and shielded by petals, wind ain't going to catch the pollen grain to distribute it. But if it's long and slender, like what Kylie says, but protruding out, dangling, pendulous, not obstructed by petals, higher chance it can be caught by the wind. So as a biologist, I find it is a better characteristic to look out for if you identify that the female and male parts are exposed to the wind. Okay? Not shielded by the petals. I think that is a better trait to look at. As I scan across, I do see also many of our friends mention that it is dark colored. Okay, later on we see some examples of flowers that aren't exactly colorful, but they also can bring out the function of attracting pollinators. Okay, long and slender. I remember this word means something else. Okay, stamens have long, slender filaments. So while it may be stated in your textbook about the slenderness, I think it's very important you pair up the slenderness with whether it is protruding out of the flower or not. Okay, the wind cannot catch it, it cannot be pollinated by wind. But therefore, if you need something to catch it, you need to catch pollen grains that are drifting in the wind, you definitely need stigmas that are large and feathery so that you can catch it like a net. Okay, so I think we have identified some of the features of wind pollinated flowers. Let's go to the next flower. Wow, this looks quite dull colored. It's quite in nature. As I study flowers a little bit more as far as insect behavior, I realized that what's dull to us may not be dull to insects. For example, flowers UV. Interestingly, when you look at the patterns and colors of flowers, sometimes what you see is not what the insects see. example, while we observe the flower to be yellow, under UV light and with the correct eyes, they can view UV light, the flower appears like this. Yeah? In fact, because of what the flower has and what the insects can see, to them, they see a little bit more. To us, it's completely yellow, but to them, they can see that this is the area I'm going to go to find nectar. Look at this flower over here. To the common folk like us, if we were to look at the flower, it may appear as totally yellow. Under UV light, you may see that there are extra guidance for the insects to find where the pollen is and where the nectar is. So, as we write down that color is important, I think it's also worth mentioning that as a biologist, to understand that actually what we see is limited to our biology. What insects see, they see so much more. Or not just insects, maybe birds also. So let's look at this flower. Is it insect or wind pollinated? So it says it's wind pollinated because for the same features, down, stigmas protrude out, or anthers hang out. Okay, if we look at where is the anther? Okay, if we look at this flower close, the anthers are all these fellas. Yeah, this is an anther with its filament. Where's the stigma then? The stigma is this small little stubby thing here. Yeah, small little stubby thing here. Okay, so this is the stigma. Let's look at other points. My picture says it's insect pollinated. Since inside of the flower is bright yellow to attract the insects. Could it be? Yeah, okay, you see there's some color over there, right? Okay, very often, unfortunately, when it comes to your quizzes, right, or exams, no money to print flower, no money to print colored flowers. Although now I think about it, it's not that hard. You have to find it. But very often we'll give you black and white. So you look at structural features rather than color. Yeah, so remember answer is this wind or insect pollinated. It says, hey, but the stigma is buried inside. Could it be to encourage insects to climb in? That's very interesting, right? At the same time, you observe that the anthers are kind of like sticking out, right? Protruding out. So how do we figure out if this is wind or insect pollinated? And I think this is a learning point number 2. I notice when you look at insect or wind pollinated plants, sometimes you have to look at it in a complementary point of view. Don't just think about the male or female part. Look at it both. If you have anthers that's going to be caught by the wind, do you have a complementary stigma that can catch the pollen grain? Because if the stigma is just buried all the way inside, stubby and so short, this short little thing ain't going to be able to catch any pollen grain. Yeah? So another learning point when you look at real flowers is that you want to look at it to see if the male and female parts complement each other. Okay? In this case, I think very likely it's insect pollinated. Because I think I have to agree with Yi. The stigma over here is a bit too short to be able to catch pollen grains that well. Interestingly, sometimes the color doesn't come from the petals or the flower themselves. For example, have you seen the bougainvillea flower? I don't know how to spell that. You look at the bougainvillea, you observe that it looks very pink. But in actual fact, where is the flower? The flower is this small little fella right in the middle. Yeah? Surrounding structures are colored, pigmented leaves. So in nature, flowers aren't always what they appear to be. Look very closely. Next week, we'll look at a little bit more examples. Sometimes the flowers are smaller than you think. Okay? Let's look at the final flower. Wow, this one, barely even look like a flower. Looks like just male and female parts dangling out. But you see some color as well. So it's insect or wind pollinated. Okay, great. Says it's wind pollinated. Stamens are long and are hanging out the flower. Nectar guides are absent. Okay, it doesn't observe nectar guides. Rightfully so, you need a petal to have nectar guides. Let's look at just his point wind pollinated because the stigmas are hanging out. If we look at Sarah's point, she says it's insect pollinated because it's bright and colorful. Howling, this one is kind of, Keller says it's wind, Tyson says wind. Okay, a lot of us feel it's wind. Try to use, she says it's insect because its stamen and filaments are short and flower is colored brightly to attract the insects. This one, this flower, I have to say, it's hard to say. I can't tell either. I suspect, and as I was reading up a little bit more, in reality, some flowers employ both forms of pollination. Sometimes queen, sometimes insect. In this case, could it be insect? Would I accept it as an insect pollinated? I think I would accept based on your points about color. Would I accept it as bait? I would accept based on the points where you say it's dangling out, stigma also long and protruding out. If this has no color, we just provide this in black and white, I think you cannot deduce this insect. It's more convincing to say that it's been pollinated. Okay? So, and I notice also as students and as a teacher, as a biologist, I also tend to look at color as the main thing. However, color is not something you can rely on when you look at your exams next time. Okay, but once again, biology, while we categorize things, there's a lot of gray area. But this one, I suspect, is by wind and also possibly insect. If not, it's a waste of energy and resources, green pigment, or nothing. Right? Often in biology, we do things for a purpose, not to waste resources. Okay, so that's a little bit about flowers. Fun fact, if you look at a sunflower, where in the world is the flower? Somebody asked me this, was it this class? I don't remember if it's this class. If you look at the sunflower, it looks like this is one flower by itself, but that's a lie. The sunflower comprises many hundreds of tiny flowers linked together. So let's look at the structure of a sunflower. I want you to therefore question every flower you see from now onwards, is it truly a single flower or is it a bundle of flowers together? If you were to look at an actual sunflower and you look very up close, you'll find that truly the flowers are here. In the center, there are many tiny little flowers. Those are the real flowers. And those are the flowers here that will develop into the fruits. Yeah? Where's the legit one? So if we zoom up close, okay. So look at over here. Look up close next time. Where are the flowers of the sunflower? Here, all these tiny structures, those are the flowers. Really small. Sorry? What are the yellow things? Petals. Yeah, they are petals, but they are not the reproductive parts. The male reproductive parts, the female reproductive part, not quite what you expect as like when you look at a butterfly booty flower. Over here, all the reproductive parts are concentrated. Actually, they are tiny little flowers, each with their tiny little petals. We call such flowers inflorescence. Inflorescence are flowers that come in bundles together. And then there are no single flowers as well. This is all outside the syllabus, just for fun, FYI. Okay? But these are a little bit too complicated. I also want to have an easier life when I'm looking through your paper. So let's go to practice makes progress. Here is a more typical example of what we may provide you to identify this insect or wind. May I get you to try to identify the parts? That's the basic number one. After which, complete all the way up to the bottom. And then I think you'll find that it is the level at which we expect you to identify is not as complicated as those real life examples. you're done, I plucked wind pollinated flowers just outside our backyard. Really don't even look like flowers. So you pass them around, look very up close. There are stigmas and anthers sticking out. That's about it. Sometimes you don't even know they're flowers. Rightfully so, they're not colored to attract anyone's attention. Okay. I think what you will see, those small little structures look something like that. A small little bracket. Then you find tiny little anthers sticking out. At the same time, you see some little streaks of stigma. Super eyes like mine, you can see. Look very close. You can see little ring like structures. Those are the stigmas. Yesterday I forgot to check if anyone was allergic. A bit too late after I conducted it. There was 1 year after I conducted the thing. Then halfway through, a girl started sneezing like crazy. Couldn't stop anything. Then onwards. Okay, I'm going to run through a sample question on structure of flowers. Those of you a bit bored, you can reverse and go back to the menstrual cycle practice makes progress. But okay, here we are. Typically, provide you a flower, and we ask you to identify the parts. If I want to challenge you a bit, I will provide you an image of a real flower. So, for example, an example of a real flower I've ever taken to show students in one of the papers look like this. Number 1. This one over here. You may be given a flower sample like that. But of course, black and white, and you asked to identify the structures. As you can see here, this particular flower is unique. It only has male parts, no female parts. Okay, you can see all the pollens overflowing from this particular flower. This is a squash flower, same family as cucumbers, pumpkins. And actually, this family of plants, their flowers have male and female versions of it. Last year when Mr. Low was trying to grow melons, we also observed this taking place. Okay, let's look at the question. So the question provided you this asks you to identify PQRS. Okay, what is P? P will be the anther. What will Q be? Q, often students cannot differentiate between ovary and ovule. You always remember ovary is the larger one. And you often have multiple ovules within the ovary. So yesterday when you're looking at the blue pea flower, you had a long style. First got style. Then you look at the ovary. Inside the ovary is where you find all these ovules. Okay? What the world are ovules? Well, residing inside the ovule is where you find the egg. So in that sense, if I have to liken this to a human structure, females, we have ovary. We don't have this thing called ovule, but we have egg. So what would be the best, one-for-one comparison? We have to find something within the female reproductive structure that might be considered ovule. What do you think? For us, not me lah. Okay, ovary, then there's the egg, right? With lots and lots of eggs. What would be the next best thing that we can match? Yeah, Valentina? Follicles? Yeah, maybe. Although it's not one-for-one, I think this is the best thing we can match with. Follicles, perhaps. Remember, surrounding the egg, we have lots of cells that nourish the egg. Collectively, this is a follicle. Perhaps, if you want a one-for-one comparison, the ovules are kind of like the follicles. Because within them, you will find the egg. It is the pollen grain's job to find its way to send the genetic material all the way here. But don't take my word for it, it's not exactly one-for-one, but if you have to find a comparison, I think it's the best you can find. Okay, what is S? What is S? S, I believe, you cannot find the answer. S is the receptacle. Yeah? Receptacle holds all the flower parts together. And as you observed yesterday, cut off the receptacle, all the layers want to fall off already. R. Oh, RB. I think R, you could have a few answers. Maybe I hear from some of you because I think answers won't provide them, correct? Sorry, what will you describe R as? Sorry? Sepals, okay? I think I will accept sepals. If you're a collection of sepals, like yesterday, remember the crown, 5 sepals fused together? We collectively call all the sepals together as calyx. Yeah. Some flowers have one more layer of leaves on the outside. In the blue pea flowers case, remember there were 2 more red cube wing petals on the outside. Yeah, so there's one more layer outside the sepals. That layer, epicalyx, Okay? Yes. Okay, is epicalyx part of the sepals? I think you can say that epicalyx also made up of sepals. But we call it epicalyx because when you look at a flower, actually they are organized in what we call, I don't think you'll see this in a textbook, maybe you do, whorls. All of the layers, notice they are in rings, concentric rings from inside out. The most important reproductive parts tend to be in the middle of the flower. Then as you migrate outwards, you get the petals. Then one more layer will be the sepals from the calyx. If you have one more layer outside that of sepals in the epicalyx. So flowers are organized in this concentric ring-like layer. I also noticed that it tends to be at the core of the flower is the female part. Then you go one more ring out, the male part. One more ring out, the petals. That is if you have both male and repro parts on the same flower. Okay, so B, they say indicate with X where the pollen will be deposited when pollination occurs. You should highlight here the stigma. This is where it should end, not on the anthers. Next, they ask you, shade the structure that has the capacity to develop into a seed following fertilization. What will you shade? I would shade all these small little structures. Yeah? These small little ovules, the ovules are what develop into seeds. But what in the world does the ovary develop into? Huh? Yeah, ovary develops into the fruit. So, if you find a matching to the human repro system, ovule is like the baby. So is this the pregnant part of the mom? So you're eating fruits, are eating I'm not quite sure, I think this one don't have a one-to-one match. Okay, so there's the fruit, there's the seeds. You often find the seeds in the fruit. Therefore, when you look at diagrams, you can in fact predict how many seeds there are going to be in this fruit. How many seeds will there be here? 6, right? And therefore, if you work backwards, if you look at if you look at cherry, and you find one seed inside. If you go back in time to its flower stage, how many ovules will you find inside? Just find one ovule inside the ovary. Yes. Okay. Assuming all the ovules get fertilized, then you will get multiple seeds. If they do not get fertilized, you will end up with sometimes fruits that are seedless. Seedless. Have you ever eaten those fruits that they claim as seedless? Then after that, when you actually eat it, you notice that you still see the seed. It's just not very hard. It's very, very soft and very tiny. That's because the ovules never quite developed, never matured. Right? So a lot of times when they say seedless, it's not exactly seedless. It's just not fertilized per se. Okay? And that's how you can work backwards. And then those fruits with hundreds of seeds inside. Can you imagine if you work backwards? Cut open the ovary, hundreds of different ovules inside. Will all the ovules get fertilized? No, it's a chance event. But the pollen, the male part of the flower really want to maximize that, so really lots and lots of pollen grains. Just like how for animals, lots and lots of sperms. Okay, predict the likelihood of pollination for the flower. Okay, then actually, if you look at this, it's quite a given, right? Because earlier on when we were describing all the structures, you can see over here, one of the dead giveaways will be the petals. Yeah? Because very often when you look at wind-pollinated flowers, they don't have petals, they are so huge. But I want to caution you, when you say large petals, be very careful because you have no sense of scale for this flower. For all we know, this flower could be microscopic. Yeah? But therefore, if you want to mention large petals relative to, okay, you can compare it to other parts. Large petals relative to the anthers, the female reproductive system. It needs to be relative to itself. Can I say again? Because you cannot be sure these petals are indeed large. It could be actually very small petals, but relative to the other parts of the flower, it is quite big. Anyone mention nectar guides? Yeah? Okay, so there's something you could mention. These lines over here are supposed to be nectar guides. Okay, if you want to say, oh, the filament of the anthers, the style of the stigma is short or long. Things like short, long, large, small needs to be made relative to its own flower parts. Because while you say this is short to a bacterium, this is really long. Yeah? So relative to the other parts. So the stigma is short and compact relative to the maybe the the filament of the anther. Then it's easier to compare. Okay? Any other things that could label or identify as insect pollinated? You want to raise over here? Okay, then it asks you to state the feature. And then it says state two features not shown in the diagram. Okay, let's look at some of your friends' responses. Large petals. Okay, so for a start, I think large petals is fine. But as you progress, try to remember that the large is always relative to other parts of the flower. In nectar guides, there are markings, and those markings are nectar guides. Anthers are short, do not protrude out of the flower. Okay, saying that it does not protrude out of the flower doesn't require you to make any relative comparisons. Okay, so this is fine. Stamens are stigmas not protruding out. Okay, so on and so forth. Short stigma, short relative to. Okay, stamen is not pendulous. Stigma is not protruding out. Okay, so I think we quite hit the mark. If we go backwards, what are some features not shown here, but can also give you a hint that it is insect pollinated? Scent. So I think scent and color should be the ones you dive straight into. Pollen grains should be large and fairly sticky and fairly abundant. This one accept? I accept. Because it's microscopic, you cannot see. Brightly colored. Presence of nectar also can. nectar is not something you can observe, but the presence of nectar guides implies that nectar may be present. Okay, so this is an example of what kind of questions you may ask to assess your understanding of how to identify insect and pollinated flowers. Okay. Okay, so that is where we will end up with flowers. Next week we will look at fertilization onwards. After the flower ovule gets fertilized, what progresses onwards. Let's go back in time. We look at the practice makes progress for menstrual cycle. I think it's worth looking at some of the questions here. This segment of the chapter, two kinds of questions you may encounter. We ask you about the function of the hormones. Our hot favorite is to ask in the form of MCQ. Or we may ask you questions related to the graphs you have learned. I notice it's tend to be these two. So let's try the first one. I like to go through, as I walk around, I sense that this part is hard to commit to memory at this point in time. Okay? If it comes a point where you are going to come to this part, revise, two ways you can go about revising. You come back to the SLS, you find I re-recorded a lesson of myself teaching singing. That is one way to revise. It's a more condensed version, so it won't take half an hour, but it should be fast enough to help you recap. Or you can go to notes, and you should also find find the lesson found under the correct learning outcomes. Okay? And I admit this part of the lesson is hard to commit to memory. So if there's anything I'd like to sum up today's lesson with is, as a learner, I find the flow charts the most useful compared to everything else. Yeah? Because the flow chart gives you a sense of the relationship, what each hormone affects and what its impact will be. So, answer the following questions. B, A, or B requires you to have a keen understanding of how the hormones affect each other. I think once you submit your answer, you will see the response or suggested answer provided to you. I think maybe I'll just do a quick recap before we end up today. When you look at your body, it comes with a hypothalamus, and that is where the starting point is. All the ones in orange are your hormones. So let's begin. When you first start off the whole cycle, you find that your hypothalamus producing this hormone. It stimulates the anterior pituitary gland, summarized by AP, to then produce these two hormones over here, LH and FSH. This explains why from day 0 to day 5, you see that it rises a little bit. It rises a little bit because hypothalamus producing this hormone, stimulating this, and these two are being produced at increasing levels. Okay, so this part explains day 0 to day 5. Why you observe the two hormones increasing? Because there was this hormone kicking start this whole process. Okay? Later on in the days, you find that the levels start to maintain. In fact, they don't just maintain, they dip slightly. Why is it FSH and LH, the levels go down? Well, that's because these two hormones also stimulate the follicles to develop, which therein produces a new hormone, estrogen. And estrogen has a negative inhibition. And this negative inhibition causes that dip. That's why you observe LH and FSH starts to go down, it maintains at rather low levels. So I would say this part over here explains day 5 to day 10-ish, day 5 to day 10. Okay, day 5, 10, 11, so on and so forth. But as the days go by, as more follicles develop, you have more and more estrogen being produced as well. Because every follicle has the ability to produce estrogen. And so when estrogen levels are very high, the opposite occurs. It then positively stimulates this, which explains why LH and FSH levels surge up. This surge causes this to increase. Okay? Causes this to increase. That explains the day 10, day 14. Day 10, day 14-ish. And when it's high enough, this will ovulate. And after ovulation, this structure becomes this structure. And two new hormones are produced. Personally, I've gone to the stage where I don't memorize that paragraph to see the textbook. I remember this flow chart, and from the flow chart, I describe what happens. Literally, your paragraphs describe the flow chart. You don't believe, you go and read. Literally, the first sentence goes, hypothalamus produces GnRH. Second sentence, something along the lines of GnRH stimulates anterior pituitary gland to produce these two hormones. The third sentence goes something along the lines of these two hormones is responsible for stimulating the growth of the follicles. You see what I mean? The flow chart is so much more useful. It gives you this relationship. It shows you how things affect each other. So don't memorize paragraphs. Remember this instead. Okay? And if you struggle at this point in time to commit this to memory, it's okay. I took many years as I'm teaching this to remember this. Yeah? And you have many more subjects to go as well. Okay? So come back to the videos if you need to. They are short and concise. Okay, with that, next week, when I see you, we're going to look at how babies form. Be it plant babies or human babies. Okay? Now I'll bring a lot of plant babies in class. By the way, this flow chart is inside your textbook. Yeah. Okay, thank you, class.